The car service picked me up at 8:30. By the time I got to the airport, it gets a little bit murky, but definitely the first plane had hit. I was on my way to the gate, and passed a TV in a lounge somewhere, and there were a little bit of a crowd of people watching, but we were all watching sort of in disbelief, even though the newscasters were saying that it was a commercial plane. Nobody believed it. We all thought, how could it be a commercial plane? It had to be a private plane. It's terrible. But I don't know if this was a level of denial or whatever. I still tried to get on my flight to go to Toronto. And when I got to the gate, they said the flight was delayed. Then they said the flight was canceled. And I even went back down to the ticketing area to see if I could reschedule, to see if I could just get a later flight. I still didn't think it was that urgent, or that anything, that big had happened. But then you started to hear murmurs, and then they said that they were shutting the airport down. And then that's when I believed, okay, a commercial flight. This is weird. And as I was leaving, but I'm still not sure if at that point I knew I must have known that there were two flights that hit, but I don't remember if I believed it or not. As I was leaving the airport with everybody else, a flight attendant was passing by, and she said, "They hit the Pentagon. This is terrorists." And then you can feel like the level of adrenaline and panic or whatever happened at the airport. People who had been waiting online for the taxis, the line just disintegrated, and now everybody was just clamoring for a taxi, but the taxis weren't going into Manhattan. I was somehow able to get a cab, and then I asked anybody else if they were going to Brooklyn, and a woman got in the cab with me, and we went back to Brooklyn and listening to the news reports, and we were both just stunned. We really couldn't even speak. And got back to Brooklyn. The driver couldn't even get me all the way to my place because traffic was just getting snarled, and I ended up, having to walk like 15 blocks with my luggage. And anyway, got home, and my wife Jo and our nephew Nate, who was staying with us at the time, they were glued to the TV. One thing that I forgot to say was that while I was at the airport, somebody who had a transistor radio informed us that, was it the South Tower that collapsed first? That the tower collapsed, and nobody believed him. Nobody could even fathom it. We just thought that he was, heard something wrong, or he was just, not right, and but of course, then we heard the news reports on the radio in the cab. By the time I got home, the second tower had collapsed. And yeah, that day was just, like everybody else, I was in shock. We were all in shock. I ended up picking up my son from school and taking home a friend of his who lived in Manhattan, who had no way, his parents had no way of coming to Brooklyn to pick him up. So he stayed the night with us. And, just glued to the TV and the radio all day. And it wasn't until I got the initial reports of how many firefighters were probably missing. It was, at that time, they were estimating about 100. And that was just devastating. That was, the whole thing was devastating to just imagine all the people who worked in that building. But it didn't, I couldn't really feel it. It was just, I was too much in shock. I couldn't really take in that information until I heard the number of firefighters. And then, having been a former firefighter and having responded to the World Trade Center as a firefighter, back in the early 80s, I knew that my old company, Engine 55, were there. And I immediately started calling the firehouse. No answer. I just called multiple times during the day, just couldn't get any information. And then the next morning, I decided that I just needed to get to the firehouse. And I remember asking my wife, Jo, if she would give me a haircut, because my helmet, I still have my old Engine 55 helmet and turnout coat. And my hair was long at the time, probably like this. And she cut my hair, short, so that that the helmet, it was still tight, but I could fit it on my head. I just grabbed my helmet, my turnout coat, a backpack. I took along my video camera as well, just instinctively. You remember those like little handy cams that people had? And took the F train from Brooklyn to Delancey Street. On the way to the firehouse, which is on Broome Street, I stopped in a hardware store and got gloves, because I thought if there's any way that I could get in there and help, I wanted to. Showed up at the firehouse and there was nobody there. But a firefighter who was driving back from the site. He told me, he filled me in on the status of the company and the guys that were missing. And one of them I knew very well, who I had worked with, Faust Apostel. And I asked him if he would drive me to the site, and he drove me in, past all the checkpoints, and he got me as close as he could. And I thanked him, I left, and then I just walked around for a couple of hours, sort of, in disbelief and shock, because everything was just covered in that, that white dust. And I started videotaping some, and then, but I really wanted to find my company. I had no idea how I would. And as I got closer and closer to ground zero, then I started to run into firefighters, and some of them who I knew, and they would tell me who they knew that was lost. And finally I made it, very close, but I didn't have access to really be on the pile. And then I happened to see some guys that I knew, some firefighters who were still on the job that I had worked with in the 80s, and they were surprised to see me. And I asked them if I could help. And the first thing the captain said to me, Captain Toomey, he said, I could tell he didn't really want me to go in with him. And he says, well, do you have gloves? And I said, yes, I do, and I guess he didn't know how to say no. And he had to get back in with the guys, because they were just taking a break. And we went in, I went in with them. And that first day was just helping to clear rubble. There were those bucket lines where you just kind of put in debris and just passed it along. And then every once in a while, a body bag would be called for. And so then a body bag was passed up the line. And then a few minutes later, the bag would have remains in it. And what was striking about it was that in the bags didn't feel full. It just felt like, it was partial remains. And sometimes we would take it to the makeshift morgue that they had set up, and then just get back on the bucket line. And it was just an amazing experience. So Engine 55 was missing 5 of their members. And so I was, sort of getting acquainted with some of the newer members, working with some of the guys that I had known. But there was one guy there who was my age, and he was in full gear. And I didn't understand how I didn't know him. I thought, well, if he worked at 55, we would have been there at the same time, and I should know him. But we didn't really have time to talk until we got back to the firehouse. At the end of the day, we went back to Engine 55. And what I learned was his name is Cliff Russell, and he was there helping to look for his brother, Stephen Russell, who was a firefighter at Engine 55. And that morning, Captain Toomey, Cliff Russell showed up at the firehouse, and he was very distraught. And the captain said, just come with us, And I think it really helped him to be able to be there. One of the things that I remember about that day was that, and in days after, is that so many people wanted to help. People wanted to give blood, people wanted to volunteer, and there was limited access, to the site. And I just felt privileged that I was able to have access through my old company. And I was so grateful for them to allow me to work with them. And we got back to the firehouse, and I asked if I could join them the next day. And they said, yeah, just show up, come here in the morning, before 9 or whatever time, and then you could ride in with us on. They had a makeshift. I guess they had a makeshift rig because their rig was buried. And so for the next few days, I rode in with them, and I just helped out on the pile. And yeah, it was still, it was very smoky. It was burning. Every once in a while, the work would stop because they thought there were survivors, and they were trying to listen, so the word would just get out that everybody had to be silent because they were trying to listen if somebody was either calling for help or tapping or doing something. And each time that happened, it ended up, being a false alarm, that while I was there, I don't remember any survivors being found. I think there were on the first day, the first day of 9/11. I didn't get there until the next day. And, it was a strange feeling being there. Because I felt totally safe, and I felt good being with my old company and seeing the effort that was underway there. It was just incredible. The humanity that just, people coming together, talking to firefighters who were there looking for their fathers or looking for their sons or looking for their brothers. And yeah, like I said, I just felt privileged to be there. And I've said this many times before. I went there to help, and I was being helped. It helped me to be there. Um, and it felt great to be connected with my company, Engine 55, because I had sort of lost touch with them. I left the fire department in 84, 85 and moved to Brooklyn. And, in the intervening years, sometimes I would go and visit the firehouse, but there were mostly new guys there. And it just felt maybe a little bit awkward. So, I just sort of didn't visit as much. And every once in a while, there would be like a reunion, of the guys that I used to know. Um, but now I stay in touch. Uh, I see them at fundraisers. I go to the firehouse every anniversary of 9/11 to be with the families, to be with the company. Um, and my time there, yeah, I was just helping out on the bucket line. One of the most moving days there, that really affected a lot of us was getting closer to the, where it was burning the most, and where, on the top of the pile. And it was a few days after, and on that day, they found the bodies of the company Engine 24 and Ladder 5. And those bodies were intact. They were passed, they were put in body bags and passed along. And that's, I mean, I really felt it that day. Um, just the incredible sacrifice and the loss of all of the first responders. Um, and also everybody who was in that building. You just felt it was still hard to comprehend 3,000 or so people that were, gone in an instant. Um, and I remember there was a firefighter there who said, well, we always, firefighters always kind of joke around with each other, like as a way of saying goodbye. They say, see you at the big one. And he says, I guess this is the big one. Um, and and even though, people were, there was that feel, tremendous feeling of sadness, but also, um, I don't know what the right word is. Sometimes I use the word joy, but I almost feel guilty using that word, because there was something about the witnessing and being part of that effort of being there, um, and seeing the humanity, in the aftermath of such evil. It couldn't help but lift your spirits and your heart. And um, and like I said, it felt good to be there. I was only there for a few days, because by the end of that week, then a lot of the heavy machinery was coming in and removing a lot of, the rubble, and I was standing around a lot more than I was helping. And I thought, the last thing I want to do is be in the way. So I don't want to be in the way. And so I decided, that was enough. That I really wasn't needed, if I was ever needed. But I just thought, I don't want to just stand around. And then I started to feel anxious. And yeah, in the weeks and months that followed that, that's when I really started to feel, I think, what a lot of people were feeling, that anxiety, depression, fear. Um, and yeah, that really hit me hard. And that's when I realized, wow, that, while I was there, I didn't really feel a lot of that. It just felt good to be there. There was no place in the world that I wanted to be. Um, and with, all of the firefighters and first responders that I was with, it just felt, it just felt right. And I'm so grateful that I was able, to, help out a little bit, but also to witness it. And yeah, and I did take some video of it and didn't really look at it for years and years and years. Well, that's not true. I did look at it a little bit in the month after, and then just put it away. And then a few years ago, um, I have a production company with my producing partner, Ren Olive, and we made a documentary called A Good Job, Stories of the FDNY. And so some of the footage that I took was used in the documentary. It was a film directed by Liz Garbus. And, one of the things about 9/11, what it brought out, for the fire department is the need for counseling. Um, uh, and it wasn't until like a few years after 9/11 that I was able to meet Nancy Carbone. I was introduced to her by Marion Fontana. She lost her husband, Dave Fontana, who was a firefighter in Park Slope, Squad 1 in Brooklyn. And I got to know her and her son, Aiden. And um, through her, she told me about Nancy Carbone, who had this organization called Friends of Firefighters that provides free mental health services to firefighters, active, retired, and their families, which was hugely important because, all these firefighters that were down there for months and months, months and months on end, and didn't see their families. They were going to funerals all the time. They were either going to funerals or they were at the site. And it took a toll, not only on them, but on their families. And so I just thought it was really smart that Nancy was offering this counseling to the whole firefighting community. And but what was also brought out was that, yeah, firefighters, rightly so, got a lot of attention, because of their heroics and for what they did in the aftermath of 9/11. But they've been doing this all along. There have been many instances, terrible fires that firefighters lose their lives, and or firefighters that have seen just awful, awful things and didn't have an outlet. Didn't feel comfortable sharing it with their family. Maybe they would talk about it a little bit with other firefighters, but they would not. The thought of going into therapy, it wouldn't even really occur to them. So what 9/11 also brought out was that guys who had experienced horrible tragedies before 9/11, they started to come forward as well. And some of them that had been through awful disasters in the past were now helping the younger firefighters who had experienced 9/11. So just to be clear, the FDNY does have their own counseling unit, and they do a great job. But there are many firefighters who don't feel comfortable going through the department. They want it to be completely private. And so that's what Nancy provides. She provides a firehouse atmosphere. She has a firehouse, an old firehouse in Red Hook, and that's where a lot of the counseling takes place. So it's totally confidential, and you know, the members, they might feel a little bit more comfortable going to an outside, place that's not officially within the fire department, but still feels like the fire department. Um, and they don't even have to go for counseling. Nancy has these, breakfasts there, and guys can just meet in the kitchen and, feel like they're back at the firehouse. I think a big need for counseling is for guys that are retired, you know, that just are missing that camaraderie and that, kind of fellowship with their brothers and sisters that they miss, that they could, just share stories with or be around. So it's a wonderful thing that, that Friends of Firefighters is there. And so since then, yeah, I've just been, uh, trying to help Nancy out, and her organization whenever I can. Also, there are other organizations like the Leary Foundation, and he does great stuff for the department. And um, that's my story.
What people don't know, it's not just that Steve feels a kinship for Friends of Firefighters. I mean, he's there. He's on the advisory board. He does fundraising. I mean, he really, really helps this organization. I know because I'm on the board of directors. So I mean, he's the real deal. What shocked me, Steve, and I only recently saw the statistic that there was a study that 47% of firefighters have considered suicide. That blew me away.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. I mean, and here's another thing that I didn't mention that, of course, afterwards, the guys, the firefighters that were there for months on end are now dealing with cancer related, 9/11 cancer related illnesses, and they are dying, and they are sick. And, that is another big thing that the fire department has to deal with. Of course, this past year with the pandemic, COVID was, a big issue for them that really put a lot of stress in their lives. And now with the 20th anniversary of 9/11 coming up, it's definitely a trigger. Um, I think there will be more attention paid, to 9/11 this year because it's the 20th anniversary. And yeah, and so a lot of the members are going to be reliving it even more vividly than maybe in the past few few years. So I mean, that is a shocking statistic. And I just want to encourage all firefighters that if you're feeling in any way, um, yeah, depressed, hopeless, just know that you're not alone, and there's help out there. Um, and we want to help.
We lost 343 FDNYers on 9/11. As of yesterday, we lost another 250 to 9/11 illnesses. And the firefighters who were there on 9/11 or who worked on the pile after tell me that it's not a matter of if I'm going to get sick, I'm looking over my shoulder, when am I going to get sick, which is hard enough on them. But think of the families as well of these firefighters who have only lived 9/11 these last 20 years, have only lived with their PTSD, have only lived with this fear of illnesses. It's the wives who need the therapy as well, and the children, because the children are suffering and they don't even know that it's because of 9/11. And Friends of Firefighters provides that service for free.
Yeah. Um, there's another documentary that Ren Arthur and I are helping to get out there, and it was made by a firefighter's daughter. Her name is Bridget Gormley.
I know her.
You know Bridget, yeah. So her dad, died of a 9/11 related cancer, and so she made, a film that, it's part personal story to her, and she had access to the guys that he worked with, and it's great to see those guys and hear them talk, but it's heartbreaking. And then she goes into the larger, concerns of the department and how many have gotten sick, how the city, how our government tried to cover up, how we tried to get back to normal too fast. And it's a very relevant, I think, to today with the pandemic of, of trying to get back, to quote unquote normal too soon. And, uh, and it caused a lot of problems. In the case of 9/11, it caused many, many, many deaths. And like you said, it affects the families. There's one really poignant, story in the film, and the film is called Dust, and of a firefighter who it was his first day. The 9/11, that was his first day. That was his first job. Well, maybe not his first day, but that was his first job, his first fire. And he just has a whole host of problems that, he's got young kids, and they'll always, they'll just always know him as someone who's got, all these health problems and not even really understanding like where it came from. I mean, in time they'll know, but yeah, so this is going to be going on for, I think, generations. It's and I think it's really important, you know when we say that we'll never forget, to really mean that. Um, it's horrible that that all of the first responders, and John Stewart was a big part of this, and John Field had to keep going, to DC, so that the funding would not run out, and that there would be enough funding for, the first responders, all the first responders, and people who were living in that area that were told that it was safe. The students who went back to school, that there should be funding, and it should never run out, because people will be getting sick for years and years and years to come.
And people who worked in the area and volunteered. And I'll tell you what makes me angry, Steve.
Yeah.
I'm grateful that the government finally came through and giving free health care to anyone who may be suffering from a 9/11 illness, and providing compensation through the Victim Compensation Fund. But what makes me angry is that if you are one of these victims, you have to find out that these programs exist. The government isn't coming to you, but if you or I owed money to the IRS, they would certainly find us, but they are not finding the victims of 9/11 and all the first responders who came in from the suburbs and every single state in the United States. How do they know about these programs? How do they connect the dots to their cancer 15 years ago that they may have recovered from? It just makes me angry that it's half the job that was done. And the other half is, okay, now you find us if you need the help.
Right.
Anyway, how long were you a firefighter with the FDNY?
I got on in November of 1980, and then I took a leave of absence in the fall of 1984 to, I was pursuing acting at the same time I was on I was on the job, and I was doing a play, and I was doing an independent film, and anyway, I just kept extending the leave of absence, and I never went back. And they all thought I was, crazy for leaving, and I thought, it was a crazy thing to do. But if I didn't love acting so much, I just felt like, I was getting opportunities, and I had to follow them. But I was always sad that I had lost my connection to the fire department. And of course, I hate the reason that I've been reconnected with them, but I'm also so grateful that I have that connection back in my life.
And we're so grateful for your help. Thank you so much,
Well,
Steve
thank you for what
Buscemi.
you're doing and for documenting these stories. I think it's really important. So thank you so much.